So Don Tapscott is the CEO of the Tapscott Group think tank and a dear friend. As one of the world's leading authorities on innovation and media, as well as economic and social impact of technology, Don advises business and government leaders around the world. He has co-authored and authored 14 widely read books and was named among the top 10 most important living business thinkers by Thinkers 50 and the Harvard Business Review. He's now an adjunct professor at the Rotman School of Management and an inaugural fellow at the Martin Prosperity Institute, where he is solving single-handedly the world's problems. And so it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Don Tapscott. Thanks for being with us, Don.
I'm happy to do this.
Awesome. So as I mentioned to you, this interview is really for my tribe, which is 25 to 35-year-old entrepreneurs, and not just entrepreneurs, but those that are committed to social innovation. So that's sort of the nature of our chat today. And so in your books and talks, I just recently reread Grown Up Digital, and it's nice to reread it with the context I now have. You speak a lot about the need for corporations to be open and transparent and to undress for success. So rather than to remain secret and opaque. So how do you think about undressing for success when you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur?
Well, the idea, first of all, I love it that your tribe is entrepreneurs because they're the key to wealth creation, prosperity, and social development. They're also the key to jobs. 95%, roughly, in Canada and the US, of new jobs are created by companies 5 years old or less. So this is really important. And entrepreneurs can have all the benefits of big companies without having the main liabilities, deadening bureaucracy, culture, legacy systems, and people, and so on. But entrepreneurs can also benefit from the things that big companies are doing, and one of them is transparency.
Right.
You know, you're going to be scrutinized like never before by your customers, your shareholders, business partners, the communities within which you operate, and increasingly you are going to be naked. So that means that as a company, I'm not talking about individuals here, as a company, you're going to be naked, so you got to get buff, as we say. You need to have value, because value is evidence like never before, but you also need to have values, integrity, as part of your DNA.
Right.
And if you do, and it's easier to do that if you're a small company, a startup, or an early stage company, then transparency can be a wonderful, powerful force for growth and for trust and for high metabolism and high performance. And basically, you know that book, Dress for Success. Well, you could undress for success. You can use transparency to drop transaction and collaboration costs, to build loyalty, to reduce office politics, and to build better relationships with customers and supply chains, to have fewer lawyers, and so on.
Right.
So transparency is something every little company can embrace.
Do you think that there is anything like oversharing information when it comes to that? I recently saw a TED Talk. I don't know if you saw Juan Enrique's TED Talk about what he called digital tattooing or electronic tattooing. So, you know, it's this permanency of sharing information online. Do you think that there's a risk with that?
Well, I like to separate out individuals sharing information and companies or institutions sharing information. In general, corporations, big or small, governments, other institutions can benefit from sharing, but you don't want to share everything. You want to, there are certain things that you don't want to give away. When it comes to individuals, I have the opposite point of view. I think that we're all sharing too much, and that we should be very restrictive about what kind of information we give away, because privacy is really the foundation, not just a free society, it's the basis for relationships and the basis for, I think, the whole concept of the self. I mean, you think about something like relationship. How do we have relationships in a world where everybody lives out loud and everything is known about everybody else? I mean, you meet somebody and you share some information with them, and maybe it's asymmetrical, so you share it back, and then you give them a little more, and then over time you start to share secrets, and then eventually the two of you know stuff that nobody else does, and that's really in part what a relationship is. Well, we're in danger of kind of blowing that all apart. So I don't buy this whole you know, that we should all live our lives in public. There's a book by a friend of mine, Jeff Jarvis, who argues that we should just be personally opening the kimono on our own, on ourselves, and I think it's not just a dangerous thing in terms of fraud and identity theft and all kinds of other things. I mean, your 14-year-old daughter has no idea what her boyfriend's going to do, with that picture of her without her top off or something like that. But it's also, we need to have privacy of individuals to have a free society.
So this is neat because, we would differ on this a little bit because I built, most of my business, and a lot of my peers in that net generation have personally branded, and I used a lot of a mix between their professional credibility and their personal dynamism to grow what they have online. So, you've got Casey Stewart, you've got, reality TV shows making a killing and growing huge engagement. You also have people like myself and other businesses who, with personal brands and opening up that way, are building impact and relationship across the globe. So what do you think about that net gen personal branding to grow their business and to find their own place in this digital world?
Well, we always did brand. I mean, there's a great book called by Irving Goffman, one of the greatest sociologists ever, from like 50 years ago. It's called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And we're always, he says we're on a stage and we do certain things that create a concept of who we are. And he never used the word brand, but that's essentially what it is. And of course, we have all kinds of new vehicles to do that, both as individuals and as companies. But that doesn't mean you should be sharing everything as an individual. I mean, unless you don't care about fraud, identity theft, about what happens to your kids when secret information gets used against them. There are certain things that I don't want anybody to know about me. So you have to make choices about what you disclose and what you don't. And I think a lot of young people are not conscious about that process of making choices. And a lot of them have suffered badly as a result.
So I think that's certainly true of that generation in the sphere of bullying, or even most recently someone who, I'm thinking, bought a python while drunk. I don't know if you caught that news story, and that's clearly going to haunt him for every job application that he ever puts in. But, on the other hand, Gen Y, the net generation, is looking for a place to belong in this world. I think, a lot of what you write about and what I'm passionate about is, where do we, and that's my generation, fit into this picture of the global economy? When we saw what corporations were like for our parents, when pensions disappeared, when job security became more of an illusion than a reality, when we see that loyalty doesn't pay off necessarily in the long term, and we want to make a change, and we want to bring our passions, but we don't necessarily want to put in our time. So you wrote a lot about that. How do you, what would you tell net generation about where they fit in and where they could focus, rather than oversharing, where they could focus their energies in the digital economy that we're in right now?
Well, first of all, this is a really important generation. It's the biggest generation ever. In the U.S., there's 80 million of them. There's only 78.5 million baby boomers.
Right. And
it's a generation, as you know, Gloria, that's also different in that your brains work differently than mine. I grew up watching TV. This generation has grown up interacting. And that's a good thing. So, you have huge power. And with power comes great responsibility. But on the other hand, you're getting a raw deal. I mean, my generation told young people, you work hard, you stay out of trouble, you graduate from university, you can have a prosperous life, a good job. Well, companies aren't hiring. And youth unemployment is an epidemic around the world.
Yeah.
So lots of young people, necessity is the mother of invention, are sort of taking it to the streets in the sense that they're not demonstrating, they're just creating their own companies. And a lot of these are companies that are based on the internet. They're not, they're not housekeeping companies or something. They're companies that somehow are enabled by the new media. And this is a wonderful and it's a very positive thing. And as you pointed out earlier, it's also positive because many young people want to live not only a a prosperous life. They want to live a consequential life based on principles. And a lot of them are, everywhere I travel around the world, I'm so inspired by young people creating social innovation initiatives and trying to, do well by doing good. And that's very inspiring.
So what is the line then for you? If you're speaking to this generation, you're speaking to me and my peers, and you're saying, on the one hand, don't overshare. On the other hand, open up, be transparent, collaborate. Where do you see that line, or what is it that how would you distinguish that for us?
It's very simple to me. Don't overshare as a person, as a company.
Okay.
Be very, tell people everything about your struggles, your products, inadequacies in your products. Be very transparent with employees about the difficulties and challenges you're having, and all that kind of stuff within a company. Or for a company to do that, it builds trust, it drops collaboration costs, and all kinds of other things. But remember, as an individual, that there's no delete button on the internet. And everything that you say or do as an individual can come back to haunt you, and lots of people are paying a price for that already. In the future, I think it will be worse.
It's neat, because I feel as though if you live by your principles and you stand for what you stand for, then there's nothing that you share that could come back to haunt you. And that's a premise that I live by too. And in my case so far, I've only thrived because of it. Now, I don't put my social insurance number out there, and I don't put my phone number out there, and I don't share the intricacies of my blood type and other things that would compose my identity. But you'd have certainly a really good archive of my life, where I've been, who I socialize with, what I do, and what I believe in, by looking at my Facebook or my Twitter. And that has attracted business and attracted a lot of the great things that I'm now proud of, the difference that I'm able to make as a result of that sharing. So it's a neat I don't even want to say distinction between the way that you see it and the way that I've experienced it so far. And having said that,
well, here's the thing. Some things take experience to learn. And, a lot of these assumptions about the way the world is, I think, are not good assumptions. I mean, we assume that governments are benevolent, for example. What happens when governments become malicious and they want to take information, very private and personal information, to find you, to hunt you down, to do things to you, to deny you certain rights, and so on, and who knows what reasons they may come up. Maybe maybe they're going to be malicious against people who wear blue shirts or something like that, to make an extreme case in point. I think corporations are also collecting massive databases, and they're building the virtual glory. And the virtual glory knows more about you than you do, because you don't know what you bought a year ago, or what you said a year ago, or what movie you watched a year ago. And there's the potential here for unbelievable power of corporations over individual people. I mean, what happens when corporations have perfect knowledge about individuals? They already manipulate us to do things that are not in our interests, and that's what happens when their power over us is increased 1,000-fold or 10,000-fold because of the detailed information they know about, not just what our preferences are, but how we think. So there are all kinds of unintended consequences of living your life out loud.
I get that. And so why is it that you choose to be open and to be social on Facebook as much as Twitter, given all of that?
Well, I make a very conscious choice about what information I'm going to share. On Facebook, I've got clear boundaries. I mean, pictures of my kids never went out to all of my Facebook friends. They went to my family and to my immediate friends. And I'm very careful about that. I use Facebook largely for commercial purposes, to introduce ideas or to promote things that I'm working on. And that's largely what Twitter is for me as well. And for more personal communications, I use other techniques, my favorite being face-to-face.
That is a good one. It's true. So here's my last question for you. What do you see as the next stage of social media and the engaged web? So you could call it Web 3.0.
I don't know if there'll be if there's a 3.0, I don't want to know about it because it's I only like things that come in 1 or 2.
Okay.
Once you get to 3, then you get to a stages theory, and from my experience, you start warping reality to fit your theory.
Okay.
So, but for sure, the web is going to evolve and it's going to change into something else. Lots of people talk about that. It already has. You know, the so-called Web 2.0 has become so much more mobile and so much higher bandwidth and so much richer. And the media is just so much richer, and with the cloud and with the whole impact of social, it's really very transformed from what we used to think the new web would be like a decade ago.
I gotcha.
Part of it is it becomes ubiquitous. There are like, what, 2 billion people on the internet now. Imagine when that goes to 7 billion in the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
Just the ability of people everywhere to access this platform makes a huge impact. I think it will become more deeply integrated into everything that we do, into our lives, and the physical world is becoming smart and connected. Billions, centrillions of inert objects that are smart communicating devices and that are providing us with all kinds of feedback, and everything from our clothing to who was that person at the cocktail party who I can't recognize.
And then you check Facebook to figure out who that is.
Yeah, and whisper in my ear right now. I count on my wife to do that. You know?
That's awesome.
But
Well, I'll sneak one quick more question in to leave on a positive note. What is your favorite example of collaboration and transparency in action?
Well, there are just so many of them. I mean, the one that, if by favorite means that I've probably told the most times.
Well, among the favorites then.
It would have to be the Gold Corp story of my neighbor who took over a gold mining company. His geologist couldn't tell him where the gold was, so he was ready to give up. And then one day he had an epiphany. He wondered, if they don't know where it is, maybe somebody else does. So he held a contest on the internet and he gave up. He opened up his geological data, which in the mining industry is your biggest secret. Yeah. He published it, and it got 77 companies bid on that. They used techniques that he'd never heard of, and for $500,000 in prize money, he found $3.4 billion worth of gold, and its market value went from $90 million to $10 billion. So it's just a great example of someone behaving very differently, using the principles that I talk about in radical openness to really create a successful business.
I love that. So for those who want to follow up with you and keep in the loop of your open thoughts, where's the best place for them to find you online?
Well, the book is Radical Openness. It's a TED ebook, and it's written by me and my co-author now of 3 books, Anthony D. Williams.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start. There's a TED Talk that goes along with it, and that's real easy to find. A million people have already had a look at that.
I got it right here on my phone, the Radical New Openness. That's perfect. So you can ride the subway and read. Thank you so much for your time today, Don. We'll catch up soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Chicky bun, chicky boom, chicky bun.